in preparing today's session, I asked around a few people, said, who do we need? Who should we bring up onto the stage to share their expertise and knowledge with us? Who's going to, who's another one of our superheroes who can help navigate around the challenges of the giant screen? And look at this, we're multitasking. Time-lapse. Time-lapse, as we know, can be used to fantastic effect on giant screen. And our superhero standing next to me now is none other than Dr. Manhattan, who controlled time himself, Peter Chang of Golden Gate 3D.
Hi guys. So I got into time-lapse back in 2009 when I produced a TV series for Discovery called Lightscapes. It was the first one shot in 4K and the first time-lapse centric TV show, over 50% time-lapse. I was inspired by Ron Fricke's work, Kronos, Koyaanisqatsi, Baraka, and my concept was essentially to make, Baraka, the TV series. Prior to that, I was producing narratives and documentaries. Then I got into 3D, caught that bug, and started experimenting with 3D time-lapse in 2011. And shortly after that, producers of Jerusalem came to me and asked me to shoot the time-lapse for that film. My first GSCA was actually as their guest back in Sacramento, 2012. And actually my first giant screen shoot was Panama. It happened right before, the month before we shot Jerusalem. And you can see some of the BTS stills from our shoot there, various setups that we had with our motion control system, 3D rig, and Nikon DSLRs. Dustin Farrell is here with me today. He was my partner on that shoot and also on the most recent McGilvery-Freeman production, National Parks. Yeah, and I just want to start by echoing much of what Christian and Miles were talking about as far as being as prepared as possible early on, making sure that everything's well thought out and budgeted from the very beginning, because once the train leaves the station, it's hard to go back. The thing I think with time-lapse is, it's become really easy to shoot, time-lapse on many cameras, including your iPhone. There's, time-lapse functions built in to many cameras now. But to do it properly for the giant screen, I think, involves a lot more work. You almost have to treat them like VFX shots. And they end up becoming VFX shots in post. Because you're going to get stuff like birds and people and distracting elements that you'll want to remove or smooth out. Trees and foliage can be very jittery with time-lapse, same with water. And one solution is to, mask those out and still them a bit in post, or shoot plates essentially and combine two shots. So you'll have, you can use a slower shutter speed to blur water or foliage and merge that with a different shot. Or say you want a moon rising, but have it kind of be a bit bigger than you would if you were shooting it with a wide shot. So you'd be merging a wide with a telephoto in post. These are all things you should think about, early on as you're planning your shots. One of the most important considerations that I want to stress with time-lapse especially is proper scouting. Just having enough time to figure out where the light is coming from, where it's going, how that's going to affect, lens flares. These are all things that you have to prepare in advance, because you could have a lens flare totally ruin your shot if it's unaccounted for. And yeah, just proper scouting so you can have all of your shots laid out, and also adequate protection from the elements. The very first shot I did for the giant screen was, we got off the plane in Panama, and knowing that I was there to try to capture the last of the rain, I think the main unit was coming the following month, and by then the rainy season would be over, and it was an important part of the story, so I was kind of like their last hope to get rain. And knowing that, I requested proper rain protection, some easy ups or some kind of protective umbrella that we could put over our camera gear. And you probably saw a few frames ago, but we got completely drenched because we didn't have that ready for us when we arrived. So we were using garbage bags that we held over this rig for a couple hours, while we were getting pelted with rain sideways, the sides of golf balls, blowing the rain off of the lens in between shots. So yeah, that was a fun intro into giant screen filming. And the other thing is time. With time-lapse, it takes a lot of time to shoot these shots sometimes. One day is 1 or 2 shots, 1 take. If you don't get the weather that you're looking for, the shot is probably not going to turn out. It's nice to have clouds for time-lapse, unless you're shooting something that doesn't require it. But a lot of the stuff I've done is landscape-oriented for the giant screen, so it's kind of an essential element. First week in Jerusalem, we didn't have any clouds. So, we did a little bit more scouting than shooting initially, but yeah, it's frustrating when you're there to shoot and you're not getting the weather you're looking for. So, Dustin, you might remember, but we went to the Western Wall and we put a prayer note in the wall asking for more clouds. Sure enough, the next day we had more clouds for the rest of the shoot. Next, having enough crew. Having a DIT, I think, is probably the most critical part of a time-lapse, probably a live-action unit as well. Just being able to process and review shots on location can save a lot of headache. Rendering dailies, checking the 3D, checking the focus, other, various image anomalies. It's just another check, someone to in a long list of checks to make sure everything is getting captured perfectly, because if it's not, you're either going to lose the shot or you're going to spend a lot of time and money fixing it in post. I was the sort of de facto DIT on Jerusalem because we didn't have one, specialized DIT. And so after shooting all day, I would copy the data at night, make, multiple backups, sometimes on top of the live action footage we were shooting with Red. And, time-lapse is raw, single files that are pretty huge, so, terabytes of data. Since I was doing that, I was only averaging maybe 3 hours a night and passing out at my computer after a 20-hour day. So it was pretty grueling. And after a while, you start making mistakes here and there. And we lost some good shots, but we also got some good ones. And I think some of the mistakes, would just be like leaving one of the cameras in HDR mode and, little things like that. But all of these things could have been avoided or addressed if we'd had a proper DIT on set to process and review those shots. It would have saved one of Daniel Ferguson's favorite shots, which was just barely lost due to focus. DSLR lenses have very minute tolerances for focus, not like cine lenses. And I think it's definitely risky to go off of the LCD on your camera for focus. It's low res, it's small. The only way to catch a soft focus for the giant screen is to have a large monitor on set that you can export to before you start the shot and check it. So an on-set DIT would have been able to do that. And the first edits, I think, or initial edits after the time lapse, that shot turned out fine. It was even fine in 4K, I believe. And it was only after... Sorry about that. It was only after it was film outed to 1570 that it was noticeably soft. So we had to lose that shot, and it was heartbreaking for Daniel and the rest of us. So hard lessons. But since then, I think we've greatly improved and refined our workflow, and always make sure we have a DIT on set to make sure these things don't happen. As far as cameras go, on Panama and Jerusalem, we used the Nikon D800E, which is an amazing camera. It's top-rated digital sensor still, 3 years later. It's been replaced by the D810, but essentially the same sensor. And it's 7K out of camera. Once you crop it for a 4:3 giant screen, it's a bit less. So as far as silver bullets go, I have a different opinion than Miles when it comes to time-lapse. A lot of people shoot with Canon. I'm a Canon guy initially, but I think when it comes to giant screen, Nikon is the way to go for now. In June, Canon is coming out with a new camera that will be able to capture 9K. Don't know anything about dynamic range or the low light capabilities, but that's pretty exciting for us. It'll enable us to capture 8K out of the camera. So I think Reed said the time-lapse footage was too sharp initially next to the other footage, too colorful, and it all had to be dialed back a bit to match the rest of the footage. I think one of the main challenges for us was reconciling 3D with dome framing, because with 3D generally you want things closer to frame, filling more of the frame, and it's very challenging for us to kind of balance those two needs. And occasionally we would just decide this is going to be a dome shot, let's not make 3D a consideration for this. So yeah, that's always a challenge. So I think you have to kind of balance that with what your main audiences are going to be for your film. Is it going to be digital? Is it going to be film? Is it going to be dome? Combination of the two. So yeah, because time-lapse takes so much time and it costs a lot to get to some of these locations, I think it's often worthwhile to just add a bit more crew so you can have multiple units shooting at the same time. We did a bit of that with Jerusalem, where we would set up a shot and have someone babysit it and then go set up another shot and kind of dovetail various shots at the same time. Well, I would say a minimum of 4 for a single 3D unit, and then if you were going to set up a second camera, maybe another 2 on top of that. So. Pardon? What was the budget? Or what was the question? What was my idea of an ideal crew size for time-lapse? And then I think ideally, you know, if you want these shots to look the best possible, you're going to want to invest in proper post-production as well. And we've found from our experience that not every post house knows how to process these properly. On Panama, we shot a couple of things HDR, and they ended up just taking the single exposures instead of processing the HDR, because it was, you know, they didn't know how, and it was just too labor and time intensive. Post-production is very sort of intricate, sometimes high-level VFX work. Dustin handled most of the post on Jerusalem, removing birds, people, flicker. That was the shot, by the way, that was just slightly soft. Sensor dust removal. How many hours did you spend on Jerusalem? Couple hundred hours of post. A lot of all-nighters, probably. So, yeah, you know, learned a lot shooting these 3 giant screen films over the last 2 years, and you know, right now we're pretty much shooting all HDR just because the cameras and the storage capacity have caught up. You know, on Jerusalem and Panama, we were very limited by card space and the camera limitations itself. So to get we couldn't get long shots that were also HDR. There were, you know, a handful, but now we can do much longer shots in HDR. And go ahead and run the clip. This will show on this screen. I think it'll be on this screen, but this will give you kind of a demonstration of benefits of using HDR. This is just the standard exposure, and these are the various exposures that you combine into a single frame for HDR. You get much richer color in the shadows and the highlights, and just makes everything kind of pop out a lot more. These are all minimally processed too, by the way. We haven't removed the birds or, you know, calmed the trees down. But just to compare apples to apples, you know, what's straight out of camera versus an HDR that's essentially straight out of camera as well. There's a lot you can still do to the HDR image, but just the raw negative, so to speak, for the shot is much richer, more to work with. Now, it doesn't always work. There are some cases where you get weird artifacts with the HDR processing, or you have subjects that are moving too rapidly to sink into a single frame. This is all framed 16:9, but you know, these are much taller shots, so. All right. So, any questions?
Wow, wow, wow. We've got, yeah, time for probably a couple of questions.
For the HDR? Or to trigger? We use a motion control system. Okay. What software did you use for time-lapse? And it sounds like he's asking how the cameras were triggered. We use a motion control system from Camblock. It's the only one that's portable and still robust enough to handle a 40-pound 3D rig. And the software is also made by Camblock.
Anything else? Well, we've got time. Oh, do you want to grab to the mic, please?
Is the is the HDR bit of it literally that the camera takes 3 pictures at the same time on each exposure?
Close to the same time, yeah. You know, it's just a fraction of a second apart. 3 pictures. The D800E had a limitation where you can only do 1-stop increments per bracket. So to get a +2, -2 stop HDR, we had to shoot 5 shots. And that filled up the card really fast. Now with the new Nikon, we can just do 3 shots, largely because of our feedback, and me just kind of pestering them like to fix it. They never released a firmware for the old camera to fix it, but they came out with a new camera.
What's the reference for the HDR? Using Rec 2020 or something else?
Reference? What's the reference? In what way? Color space. Whatever you want to output it to. I mean, I think it's Adobe RGB in camera. So it was out at Rec 709. I think so.
Well, we're just running out for time, so thanks again, Peter, for beautiful, beautiful work.